Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics and, well, I'd only just finished doing the last video on what appeared to be a member of the government leaking a plan for Boris Johnson to try and use the Civil Contingencies Act to suspend the law and get around the Benn Act, which would compel him to sign a letter requesting an extension to Article 50, when news broke that there may actually be a serious plan for a no-deal Brexit, and if so, it would be a plan that the courts could do nothing about and that Parliament could do nothing about. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. So, what is this about then? So John Major, who was the former Prime Minister, who got himself involved in the Supreme Court case last week, where he was very much arguing against the current Prime Minister, fears he knows what Boris Johnson / Dominic Cummings, whoever you think this plan would be, probably someone else's plan actually, can have to avoid no-deal Brexit. So the situation that Boris Johnson faces at the moment is that if Parliament do not vote for a deal, the Benn Act is watertight, it's legally watertight, and that would mean on October the 19th, he has to sign. There's no way out of it. So far, he's been quite bullish about it. He said, of course, I'm going to obey the law, but we are definitely leaving October the 31st. And people say, well, how can that be then? That's a bit of a contradiction. Now, I will point out at this point, obviously, there's been various times, including earlier tonight, when I've said the legal experts have said that this is watertight. It was announced regarding the Benn Act a week or two ago by some senior legal experts that there was actually a little bit of a problem with the Benn Act. The fact that if Parliament did vote for a deal, then he wouldn't be bound by the Benn Act, but would still go out without a deal. And they hadn't said anything publicly about it because, of course, they knew about it, but they didn't want to say anything because why would you tip off Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson about it? So the same thing could always be true here. So when I say these legal experts are saying it's watertight, we have to bear in mind that if they do see a problem with anything, they're not going to say so because they know how damaging a no-deal Brexit is. And it may be the case here. But again, there's the reason why the lawyers went public with the first problem with the Benn Act was because it was strongly believed that Johnson already knew about it at this point. And the same thing's happened here. So John Major believes that Boris Johnson knows how to circumvent the Benn Act. And it actually sounds, from what I can gather, obviously I've spent some time trying to find out what, I follow a number of British legal constitutional experts, what they're saying about it. And it's not, the news isn't good. The news is actually he could do this. It comes down to something called an order of council. Now, there's an order in council and an order of council. And the council it refers to is the Privy Council, which is formed from government ministers who advise the Queen on various prerogative powers. Now, the act I was talking about earlier that would allow Boris Johnson to suspend laws, the Civil Contingencies Act, requires an act in council. Now, that means it needs the Queen's approval. An act of council doesn't. And it does transpire. You can't find a massive amount of information on these acts of council. They don't seem too common. When do they happen? They're usually used for like statutory instruments, secondary legislation, things where, the government just needs to do a thing. They don't really need to get Parliament involved. And the suggestion is that the Privy Council could suspend the Benn Act for a period of time, let's say until the 1st of November. So they're not abolishing the legislation. They're just suspending it for a period of time, let's say a couple of weeks, because they don't have to do this until like October. It doesn't require Boris Johnson to do anything until October the 19th. So they could do it on October the 18th for, say, 2 weeks. And then at the end of it go, oh, the Benn Act. Oh, it says I have to sign this letter. Oh dear, it's a bit late. We've left the EU without a deal. Oh, sorry about that. Now, the reason why this is potentially so worrying is because the courts won't be able to get involved. This is not like the prorogation issue where it was used He lied about it and he did it for too long for his stated reasons. And it was quite clear the reason was for frustrating the will of Parliament. Yes, this would be used to frustrate the will of Parliament, but no one seems to be suggesting that a court could rule it unlawful because these things exist. This power exists and it exists specifically to not require Parliament. So, it would be perfectly legal. Nothing Parliament can do about it. Even if they try to amend it to bring the act forward to make him sign it next week, again, he will just suspend it early, won't he? There's no minimum amount of time. He could suspend it for a month as far as I can tell. So this is actually a serious prospect. This is something that he might think is checkmate, and in many ways it could be. If Boris Johnson remains Prime Minister, he can do this. Unless, of course, his cabinet rebel, but of course they're not going to. They haven't so far. Even though we know there's a number of cabinet ministers seriously uneasy about what's going on. So John Major himself, you can tell how desperate he is. He's appealed to his wider party. Can you believe that? To his wider party. He's appealing to them and telling them that the country are not going to forgive them for this. And that is true. The reason why Sir John Major has said, and I've said it before as well, that Boris Johnson is so desperate for an early general election is he needs that. He's so convinced he's going to get away with the no-deal Brexit, but he also knows it's going to be a disaster for the country. He knows he cannot win an election once the consequences have hit. So he needs the election beforehand. So what can the opposition do about this? I already said Parliament can't stop this order of council. They can't stop it. So you could consider at this moment in time the Ben Act, they may as well not have enacted it. In fact, if you imagine that they knew about this for some time and they actually genuinely did have a cunning plan, when I was saying that their plans have all fallen into ruin, okay, it looks like they actually did have this one, because you notice that Boris Johnson, while the Ben Act was going through the House of Lords, did withdraw his opposition to it at some point. When it was at that point not certain it would definitely get through, he allowed it to go through. This was curious behaviour. Yes, there's a few ways in which he thought he could get away with it, but those were all non-starters. But this one is serious. And there's only two things the opposition can do. The first of which is just to make sure that he gets punished for it by making sure that there is not a general election until at least late November. That's very likely anyway, but that's the only thing they can do, because the government's own report says that there will be civil disobedience, potentially rioting, within 2 weeks. It's not like they have to wait for months at all. A few weeks should do it. So a general election at the end of November, you cannot see how Brexit can stand up. Yes, we all know there are lots of Brexiteers who will happily blame everyone else, EU, opposition, MPs, everyone, for what's going on. But there'll be plenty of other people going, do you know what, the country's knackered. This Project Fear was correct. They can't win. But should we try and avoid the no-deal Brexit in the first place? That would be fantastic. There is only one way to do that. One way. If this is true. If this is all true, and they can use an order of council to do this, I don't know, but I'm not seeing anyone disagreeing with that. I understand that an order of council can't be interfered by either the Queen or Parliament. And because they're permitted to use it for this sort of purpose, not for this motivation, but for this purpose, I really don't see how the courts can get involved either. In a situation like this, the only way is to replace him as Prime Minister. If you consider at this point the Ben Act is dead, there is no legislative way of forcing him to seek an extension. That means one of two things. Either someone else has to seek that extension. That surely can only mean the Queen. Well, not supposed to really do that. And the Prime Minister would advise her not to do it anyway, put her in an impossible situation. Ultimately, all Parliament can do now is replace him. Now, I'd said before, as early as yesterday, that they need to keep Boris Johnson in place. They need to make him be seen to be obeying the law. But do you know what? If there is actually a way, for all the cock-a-hoop of the last few days where we've been saying, even the Prime Minister's not above the law. Well, actually, Seems he may be in some respects. So if we cannot force him to comply with the Benn Act, and he's got a legal way of getting out of it, then we're not going to have the benefits of seeing him have to obey the will of Parliament, in which case all we can do is replace him. This should be the obvious thing to do, of course. It will remain the only way to stop a no-deal Brexit, which means the opposition parties have to get behind someone who will then seek that extension. Whoever it is, it doesn't matter. It has to be someone, because if this is true, as far as I can tell it is, that leaves one method for dealing with it. So next week, maybe we will see. And we don't actually have to see a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson, by the way. It was being talked about earlier that Parliament can replace him without a vote of no confidence. They can simply vote for another Prime Minister, at which point, of course, the Queen will have to dispense with Boris Johnson's services and appoint the new Prime Minister. But they have to get behind someone. And you need everyone. You need Labour, the whole Labour Party. You need all of the Lib Dems, the SNP, the Tory rebels, most of the independents, the independent group. You need someone they can all agree to get behind, at least just to get this extension, because then that won't require the Benn Act. It'll just require that the Prime Minister's change. But anyway, wow, fast-moving news evening. Let me know what you think in the comments below, of course. Hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.